I come to the Senate floor to tell my colleagues why I support the issue of cap and cut and balance. On August the 2nd, our nation will be unable to borrow money to meet our current obligations. We've known for a while that this was coming. Our annual deficits have been near $1.5 trillion for the past 2 years, and it's going to be that large this year as well. What has the President offered to confront this looming crisis? I ask that question because people expect a president to lead, and we have an executive budget and an executive budget law since, I think, the 1920s has put the president in a lead on these issues. So I ask another question: what has the Senate Democratic majority done to address our deficit crisis? Because it is the responsibility of a majority to present a budget to the Congress of the United States, and we have not had a budget resolution for more than 800 days now. So I think you can draw the conclusion whether or not it's the President of the United States or the Senate majority. The answer is simple: not much has been done. For the most of this year, President Obama said we should raise the debt ceiling without taking any measures to address our long-term deficits and debt. It was the position of this administration that Congress should simply rubber stamp another debt ceiling hike with no plan in place to reduce our deficits. That plan was voted on in the House and was soundly rejected there as well. All of the Republicans and nearly half of the Democrats in the other body voted against increasing the debt ceiling without deficit reduction. So it seems to me that we have a lot of bipartisan agreement when people say we have no bipartisan cooperation, that with the Senate's vote on the President's budget and in the other body, with nearly half of the Democrats opposing a debt ceiling without deficit reduction, that there's a clear understanding in a bipartisan way in the Senate that the President's budget spends too much, taxes too much, and leaves too much debt. And in the House of Representatives, there's a strong feeling that's bipartisan that if you're going to have a debt ceiling increase, there needs to be deficit reduction. So don't ever say that there's not bipartisan agreement, because it's been expressed in votes in both houses. The White House itself has never offered a single debt ceiling proposal for a vote. And the Senate Democratic leadership has also seriously shirked its responsibilities because, as I've said once before today, they haven't put forward a budget in more than 800 days, even though the law requires that they do it. Every family in America that works hard and sacrifices to pay their bills ought to be ashamed at the failure of the U.S. Senate to offer a budget in violation of the law. In sharp contrast, members of the House fulfilled their responsibility and passed a budget earlier this year. And so the very same majority party in this body that hasn't presented a budget for 800 days has done nothing in regard to the House budget but demagogue it. While they can't find time to compile their own budget, they've sure found time to make speeches that are derogatory about the House budget. And the House budget then obviously means that the House of Representatives did their responsibility under the law by presenting a budget and adopting a budget. There is now a framework from the so-called Gang of Six. Their plan also lacks any specificity. Perhaps that's the political strategy on the other side has chosen, Voters and the American people can't be upset with a position you've taken if you haven't taken a position. Just like a rule for political leaders, if you never get in trouble for a speech you don't give. Perhaps this strategy may be politically expedient, but it's going to drive our economy and our country off the cliff. The strategy of placing a higher priority on the next election rather than the economic and fiscal situation facing our country is how we got into this mess. Based on the lack of proposals put forth by the other side, one could assume that they're perfectly content borrowing 40 cents for every dollar that we spend. Are they pleased with the deficits of $1.5 trillion annually? Well, you could conclude they must be, because they haven't offered a plan to reduce the deficits. If somebody would tell me, how much money do you really need from the American people to satisfy your appetite to spend, and I could get a limit on it, and it was a hard limit, I might even vote for it. Because I'd like to have people say they're finally satisfied, that government ought to be so big, but no bigger. History proves tax increases result in spending increases. We know that increasing taxes is not then going to reduce the deficit. Instead of going to the bottom line, tax increases are a license for Washington to spend even more. History also shows that tax increases don't increase revenues. You cannot tax your way out of this problem. We have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. That's why I'm supporting the only plan that has been put forth to address our deficit and debt problem. The Cut, Cap, and Balance plan passed the House with bipartisan support of 234 members. This plan is the only plan offered to cut spending in the near term. We need to halt and reverse the trend of the last 2 years when government spending increased by 22%, not even counting the failed stimulus program of another $830 billion. So it only makes sense to impose a requirement that we live within our means. Washington proves again and again that it needs this kind of discipline. I'd say to my colleagues, if you don't support this plan, then offer your own plan. You know that the debt limit must be increased, but you also know that we must take action to reduce the future levels of deficits and begin to bring our debt down. Where is your plan to do that? Where is your budget resolution that hasn't been presented in the last 800 or more days to the United States Senate, violating the budget law?